Nobody knows the real reason I started dressing like a girl. They all assume it was some innocent exploration, a poetic journey of self-discovery, a quest to understand who I was beneath the skin, and expectations they imagine late nights in front of mirrors, trying on personalities like costumes, finding something essential that had always been hidden. But that isn't the truth. The truth is darker, sharper, more precise. It's about revenge. My name is Michael Scott, and this is what really happened. The story nobody will tell you because it's messy and painful and refuses to fit into any neat narrative of self-acceptance. It began with a photograph, unassuming at first glance, like any other faded image lost to time. But when I saw it, something inside me twisted. It was the kind of photograph that makes you rethink everything you've been told, every lesson drilled into you about who you are supposed to be, every story about what it means to be a man. I was 17, too old to be naive, too young to understand the full consequences of what I had stumbled upon. My mother had sent me into the attic to fetch Christmas decorations, a task I assumed would be dull and forgettable. Instead, I found a shoebox hidden behind old furniture, coated in dust, the kind of dust that seems to settle around secrets and memories best left untouched. Inside were letters and photographs I had never seen before, relics of a life my father had hidden from the world. And there it was, him, my father, in a wedding dress, not a joke, not a Halloween costume, a wedding dress. And next to him, another man in a tuxedo, smiling with a happiness so genuine it made my chest tighten. The back of the photograph bore a date, 1995, 3 years before I was born, 3 years before he married my mother, 3 years before the life I thought I knew began. I sat there, frozen, holding the letters in trembling hands. Every word my father had written to someone named Gabriel was a window into a life erased, a self suppressed, a love-abandoned dreams of moving to San Francisco together, fears of a world that would never accept him, confessions of a heart weighed down by secrecy. All of it spilled into my lap like a storm. I could feel the magnitude of the sacrifice he had made. And yet, there was a bitter taste in my mouth, not for him, but for what it meant for me. I had been raised to be the son he wanted, to embody the masculinity he claimed I lacked, to inhabit the role of the straight, tough boy he insisted I become. All the times he pushed me towards sports I hated, all the lectures on standing up for myself, all the disappointed frowns when I showed interest in art or music or anything he considered too soft, they suddenly became pieces of a puzzle, revealing a father projecting his own fear and regret onto a child too young to resist. And I hated him for it. I hated him for making me a participant in a lie that had defined every interaction, every expectation, every choice of my life. The idea came to me slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, like a heat creeping under the skin. What if I could show him what it meant to force someone into a box? What if I could become everything he was too afraid to be, everything he had buried under decades of fear and social pressure? What if I could wield my own identity as a weapon, the way his lies had shaped mine? I began in small increments, seemingly innocuous. I let my hair grow longer than he approved, taking pleasure in the subtle tension it caused. I cared more for my skin, for the way I presented myself, for the details he had always dismissed as frivolous. Each choice was calculated, each change deliberate. He noticed immediately. "You need a haircut," became his daily greeting. "Why are you walking like that?" became a constant refrain, each question tinged with a panic he could not disguise. And I reveled in it, quiet but fierce, knowing every shift in his expression was a confirmation that my plan, whatever it was working. Late one night, while the house slept, I discovered Prism Stories, a website that would become both tool and guide in my growing campaign. It offered a feminine size calculator, and when I input my measurements, the results were astonishing. Naturally, feminine proportions, perfect symmetry, curves in the right places. Everything aligned with a form I could shape, sculpt, and ultimately wield. I bought a book called My Closet Has Secrets and devoured it as though it contained arcane knowledge. A manual not just for clothing, but for power, for transformation, for subtle psychological warfare. I began to experiment, first with concealer and lip gloss. The first time I went to school with just a hint of makeup, I saw the effect immediately. My father nearly choked on his coffee, his eyes widening in disbelief. "What is that on your face?" he demanded. Innocence, the kind that masks calculation, was my shield. "Just trying to take better care of my skin," I said. Logical, defensible, unassailable. His jaw tightened, but he could not argue without revealing the fear that churned beneath his surface. From there, I escalated carefully, almost surgically. I convinced my mother to take me shopping under the guise of exploring style within acceptable parameters, technically men's clothing that clung to my frame in ways that left him squirming skinny jeans that highlighted my legs, fitted shirts that emphasized my narrow waist, subtle exercises to enhance my hips and define my curves, all executed with a precision that made my father's unease grow. By the day, he would comment, "You need to bulk up, act more masculine," but I saw through the surface. He was watching helplessly as his son became the embodiment of a truth he had abandoned decades ago. Every look he cast my way was a mirror of his own lost youth, a warning of what happens when you hide who you are. By my senior year, the transformation had become undeniable. Dresses and feminine clothes, ordered online and hidden carefully in my room, were no longer an experiment. They were my arsenal. Each outfit, each brushstroke of makeup, each soft wave of hair was a deliberate escalation, a statement of power disguised as rebellion. I was ready to test the limits, to confront him with a truth he had buried, to see if the fragile veneer of control he held over our lives could withstand the weight of exposure. And then came prom, the ultimate stage. Jessica Thompson asked me to prom. Jessica, the quintessential teenage girl, the golden image of adolescent perfection, the one boy in school who made every other boy feel clumsy and inadequate, and yet had always treated me with kindness. When she extended the invitation, I could see my father's pride swelling from across the room, a radiant beam that filled the space with expectation. The pressure to conform, to present myself as the straight, respectable son, was immense. But I had been planning for this night for months, calculating the perfect moment to reveal not just a transformation, but a revelation. I chose a dress, a deep, shimmering blue gown that would contrast the expectations of tuxedos and traditional roles. I styled my hair in soft, deliberate waves, applied makeup with precision, and when I walked into that gymnasium, I became something extraordinary. Not just a girl, not just Michael in disguise, but a living statement, a confrontation, a revelation. Reactions came instantly. Laughter, whispers, astonishment, a ripple of disbelief. But Jessica, looking at me with an expression I had never seen before, spoke softly, almost reverently, "You look beautiful." Her words carried no judgment, only recognition, understanding, and perhaps admiration. And in that moment, I felt something beyond anger or revenge, something I had not anticipated. I felt seen, not as a weapon, not as a challenge to my father, but as myself, as someone who had finally grasped the contours of identity, authenticity, and courage. That night at prom, as I walked into the gymnasium swathed in the blue gown I had meticulously chosen, styled and perfected, a wave of exhilaration and fear washed over me like tidal water, pulling at my chest. Every step was a deliberate defiance, every glance a test of my father's limits, yet beneath it all simmered an unexpected, fragile hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he could see me, not as a challenge, not as a threat, but as the person I had always been beneath his expectations, beneath his fear, beneath the years of judgment and correction. The room was a mixture of disbelief, admiration, and hushed murmurs. Some students whispered, others laughed nervously, while a few stared with wide-eyed awe, their reactions a mirror to the storm of emotions roiling within me. Jessica Thompson's hand found mine as we walked across the polished gym floor, her touch gentle, her gaze steady, her voice a soft anchor in the tempest of gazes and judgment. "You look beautiful," she said, her words simple, pure, and devastatingly powerful. In that instant, I understood something crucial. The transformation I had undertaken, the rebellion I had orchestrated with such precision and cunning, had become something more than revenge. It had become an act of truth, a reclamation of self, an unmasking not to wound, but to be seen, to exist fully and unapologetically in the eyes of someone who recognized the courage it took to arrive at that moment. Yet even as the exhilaration coursed through me, a flicker of guilt danced along the edges of my consciousness, a whisper reminding me of the destruction my pursuit of vengeance had already sown, and the irrevocable fractures it had created within the family I had once cherished. Outside the gym, in the parking lot where the fluorescent light of the school lamps glinted off the wet asphalt, my father waited, a silent sentinel in the night, a figure both familiar and strange. The sight of him standing there, rigid, his hands slightly trembling, his face pale but composed, made the culmination of months of planning feel simultaneously triumphant and hollow. I could see the panic etched into his features, the recognition of something he had spent decades trying to suppress, the ghost of his past mirrored in my present, and it struck me with a force I had not anticipated. In my attempt to punish him, to expose the cowardice I had convinced myself he embodied, I had inadvertently held up a mirror to my own fears and desires. Our eyes met across the distance, an unspoken understanding passing between us, a recognition of shared humanity and mutual entrapment in lives dictated by the expectations of others. He took a step forward, halting just shy of us, and his voice, quiet but unwavering, broke the tension. "You look beautiful, son," he said, the words heavy with both history and revelation, just like I did at your age. In that moment, everything I had believed about vengeance, about the power of exposing truth as a weapon, crumbled into dust. I realized that my rebellion had not been aimed at him alone. It had been directed inward, at the parts of myself I had long denied, the parts I had cloaked in anger and defiance, the parts that had mirrored his own hidden truths in ways I had not yet understood. We stood there in silence, the hum of the night around us, the distant music of prom fading into a background murmur, two generations caught in the delicate balance between concealment and revelation, between fear and acceptance. Jessica remained beside me, her presence a quiet testament to the possibility of understanding, of compassion, of seeing and being seen without judgment. And I realized then that love, in its purest form, was not about conquest or rebellion, but about recognition, about empathy, about the fragile courage it took to exist authentically in a world that constantly demanded conformity. 6 months later, the consequences of our unspoken confrontations began to manifest in ways I had anticipated and others I had not. My father left my mother, not for Gabriel, who had moved on and married years before, nor for some grand romantic reconciliation, but for himself. He chose to reclaim the life he had long denied, to breathe in honesty after 2 decades of pretense, to finally inhabit the person he had always been beneath layers of expectation, fear, and societal pressure. The aftermath was brutal, tearing at the seams of our family like a storm uprooting old trees. My mother, devastated, mourned the life she believed she had built, the marriage she had thought was permanent, the narrative of love and stability that had been shattered by truths long buried and finally unearthed. Her grief was relentless, cascading through the household in waves of anger, sadness, and disbelief. I had intended none of this, yet I could not deny that my actions had been the catalyst. I had wielded my identity as a weapon, and in doing so, I had forced everyone around me to confront realities they had long avoided. The victory I had imagined, the satisfaction I had sought in witnessing my father's discomfort and fear, was hollow, bitter-sweet, tainted by the destruction it had left in its wake. I had proved my point. Hiding who you are, living a life dictated by fear and expectation, corrodes everything around you, shapes and distorts the lives of those you love. But the cost of that revelation was more than I had ever imagined, and I was left to navigate the ruins of intention and consequence. In college, away from the prying eyes of family and peers, I began the slow, painstaking process of disentangling the strands of identity, of separating those aspects of my femininity that were authentic from those born of defiance and vengeance. Some nights, I still put on dresses, still apply makeup, still indulge in the soft contours and textures that had once been weapons. But now they are rituals of reflection, exercises in understanding rather than performance. I look into mirrors with a quieter curiosity, seeking to understand which gestures, which choices, which forms of self-expression belong to me, and which were forged in the heat of rebellion. This work is neither linear nor neat. It is messy, complicated, and occasionally painful, a continuous negotiation between who I was, who I became, and who I might yet be. I have learned that identity is not something that can be wielded like a weapon, cannot be leveraged to elicit reactions or enforce recognition. Identity is at its core a deeply personal act of creation, a negotiation between internal truth and external reality, an ongoing dialogue with oneself that requires courage, patience, and compassion. Through it all, I have come to understand that the reasons for becoming who I am are layered and sometimes contradictory. The initial spark, the first steps into makeup, clothes, and femininity, was undeniably about revenge, a response to the lies and pressures I had inherited. Yet as I navigated the aftermath, as I saw the consequences of wielding truth as a weapon, I discovered something more profound: love. Love for the person I uncovered beneath the anger, beneath the schemes and strategies, beneath the deliberate manipulations designed to shock and provoke. Love for the father who, despite the cost, finally found the courage to be himself, who reclaimed his life and his identity, and who began to teach me, through silence and tentative conversations, that the truth is not a weapon, but a necessity, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Our relationship is still evolving, fragile and tentative, yet anchored in a recognition that the past cannot be undone, and that identity, honesty, and love exist not as instruments of judgment, but as the scaffolding upon which human connection can, with effort and care, be rebuilt. Now, when I reflect on the path that brought me here, the story I tell myself is no longer one of vengeance alone. It is a story of revelation and reclamation, of learning to distinguish between rebellion and authenticity, between the self you perform for others and the self that exists beneath expectation and fear. Some nights, I linger in front of mirrors, tracing the contours of faces and forms that are both familiar and unfamiliar, exploring the textures of hair and skin, the interplay of light and shadow, the subtle gestures that define who I am. And in those quiet moments, I am not defiant, nor am I performing. I am simply existing, fully and without apology, learning that the most profound courage lies not in shocking others, not in enacting revenge, but in inhabiting one's own truth, in embracing the complexity, messiness, and beauty of identity in its rawest, most unvarnished form. The story I tell now is not about neat self-discovery, nor about triumph over others. It is about survival, understanding, and the slow, patient reclamation of self from the ruins of expectation and deception. A reminder that identity is not a weapon but a journey, infinitely demanding and endlessly rewarding. A testament to the fact that love, when guided by truth rather than vengeance, can transform even the most tangled and painful histories into something resilient, necessary, and profoundly human.